The silver-blue glow of Amira's 3 moons filtered through the transparent ceiling panels of Galactic Preparatory Academy, casting ethereal shadows across the dormitory floor. Lyra Santos stood at the window, gazing at the unfamiliar constellations that sparkled in the night sky. She pressed her palm against the cool surface of the reinforced glass, a barrier designed to withstand atmospheric pressure differentials, and, as the orientation pamphlet had cheerfully noted, occasional meteor showers. Earth seemed impossibly distant now. 17 years growing up in the dense rainforests of New Amazon hadn't prepared her for the weightless feeling of being the only human in a school of 5,000 alien students. The subtle hum of the artificial gravity generators was her constant companion, a technological marvel that most species required, but that her Earth-born body found slightly disorienting. Lyra's reflection stared back at her, dark eyes set in a face framed by close-cropped black hair. Regulation length for Deathworlders to prevent contamination concerns. The term still made her wince. Deathworlder. As if being from Earth was a communicable disease. Her admission letter had been careful to use the scientific terminology. Class 5, Hazardous World Origin Student. The welcome packet had been less diplomatic, with warnings about special accommodations for high-gravity adaptations and protocol for Deathworld physiological incidents. A soft chime from her datapad interrupted her thoughts. The message glowed in holographic letters. Xenobiology, 203, Dangerous Organisms. Classroom A113. 0800 hours. Tomorrow would be her first real class, her chance to prove that humans were more than walking hazards. Lyra took a deep breath, her lungs easily processing the slightly thinner atmosphere that had several of her classmates wearing respiratory aids. That was the problem with being a Deathworlder. Every advantage was also seen as a threat. "I am more than my planet's reputation," she whispered to herself. A mantra that had carried her through the grueling application process to become the first human exchange student at GPA in over 50 years. The moons continued their slow dance across the sky as Lyra finally turned away from the window, preparing herself for what would surely be the most challenging year of her life. The corridors of GPA shifted and realigned themselves each morning, a living architecture that adapted to the day's academic schedule. Lyra navigated the flowing hallways with the help of her datapad's map, which updated in real time as walls disappeared and new passageways formed. "Watch it, Deathworlder," hissed a tall, segmented student as Lyra accidentally brushed against one of its lower appendages. The creature's translucent exoskeleton flashed warning colors of orange and red. "Sorry," Lyra mumbled, pressing herself against the opposite wall to give the being a wider berth. She'd memorized the sensitivity profiles of 17 major species, but there were hundreds represented at GPA, each with their own physical boundaries and cultural taboos. "Don't mind Zorth," came a chirping voice from somewhere near Lyra's elbow. "Scalites are always grumpy before their third molt." Lyra looked down to see a small, rodent-like creature, with oversized ears and bright, intelligent eyes. The being wore an elaborate harness fitted with miniature atmosphere regulators and what appeared to be gravity compensators. "I'm Maz," the creature said, extending a delicate 6-fingered hand. "Atmospheric adaptation specialist. 2nd year. You must be the Earth student." Lyra hesitated before shaking the offered hand, careful to apply minimal pressure. "Is it that obvious?" Maz's whiskers twitched in what Lyra hoped was amusement. "Well, you're the only one who doesn't need a breathing apparatus in this section, and you're walking like the gravity is all wrong." The small alien adjusted one of the dials on its harness. "Plus, Word travels fast when a Class 5 enrolls. The classroom doors loomed ahead, an imposing arch of living metal that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Students of various shapes, sizes, and physical states were filtering in, some walking, others floating, a few seemingly phasing through solid matter. "Is it true?" Maz asked, voice dropping to a whisper. "That Earth predators can chase prey for days without stopping, that you can regrow severed limbs?" Lyra sighed. "The first part is called persistence hunting, and only some humans practiced it historically. And the second part is completely false. We can't regenerate limbs." "Oh," Maz's ears drooped slightly. "Well, Professor Quell will be disappointed. He's been telling everyone he's going to dissect a Deathworlder in class." Lyra stopped short. "He's going to what?" But Maz was already scurrying ahead, weaving between the tentacles and appendages of larger students. "Just kidding. Mostly. Come on. We'll be late." The xenobiology classroom was designed like an amphitheater, with concentric rings of workstations surrounding a central platform. Each station was customized for different physiologies: aquatic environments for water breathers, anti-gravity bubbles for low-density species, and reinforced platforms for heavy gravity beings. Lyra found her designated area, marked with the familiar hazard symbol for Earth, a red circle with a diagonal slash, underneath which was printed, "Class 5, Caution." She gritted her teeth and took her seat. The workstation was clearly designed with human physiology in mind. The chair was sturdy, the controls positioned for 5-fingered hands, the display calibrated for Earth-standard vision. It was both a comfort and a reminder of her outsider status. A hush fell over the room as the central platform illuminated. A tall, willowy figure stepped into the light. Professor Quell resembled a mantis crossed with a particularly elegant tree. His exoskeleton, a pale green that shimmered with iridescent patterns. 4 arms moved in graceful coordination as he activated the central holographic display. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Xenobiology, Dangerous Organisms." The professor's voice resonated through translators adjusted for each species' hearing range. "I am Professor Quell, your guide through the galaxy's most fascinating evolutionary abominations." His compound eyes swept the room, pausing momentarily on Lyra. "We are particularly fortunate this term to have with us a representative from one of the galaxy's most notorious death worlds. Earth, or Terra, as it is classified in galactic records, is a Class 5 hazardous planet whose native species have evolved under conditions that most civilized beings would find unimaginable." Lyra felt the collective attention of the class shift toward her. Some students leaned away. Others stared with undisguised curiosity or revulsion. "However," Professor Quell continued, "today we begin not with terrestrial monsters, but with something even more extraordinary. The Venari flesh-eater beetle of Proxima Centauri 6G." The hologram in the center of the room shimmered and coalesced into the form of a massive insectoid creature. 6 feet long, with mandibles that could crush titanium and a carapace covered in venomous spines. The Venari was the stuff of nightmares. Its multiple compound eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence, and acid-secreting glands pulsed visibly along its segmented abdomen. The Venari is among the most perfectly evolved predators in the known galaxy, Professor Quell lectured, manipulating the hologram to highlight different anatomical features. Its venom contains both neurotoxic and acidic components, capable of liquefying the internal organs of prey while simultaneously paralyzing the victim's nervous system. Lyra found herself leaning forward, genuinely fascinated. Earth had some terrifying insects, but nothing that compared to this monstrosity. The most dangerous aspect of the Venari, the professor continued, is its larval stage, nearly microscopic. Venari larvae can remain dormant for centuries, awaiting suitable hosts. Once activated by the body heat of potential prey, they release a distinctive pheromone, a sweet, almost floral scent that belies their lethal nature. As if on cue, a faint, honeysuckle-like fragrance wafted through the classroom. Several students murmured appreciatively at the realistic touch. Yes, quite effective simulation. Professor Quell acknowledged. Our sensory emulators are programmed to reproduce the full experience of encountering these creatures, though obviously without the fatal consequences. The holographic Venari reared up, its mandibles clicking together in a threat display. Acidic venom dripped from specialized glands, and the hologram included the sizzling sound of the liquid eating through stone. And then, from somewhere in the back of the classroom, came another sound, a soft, wet hiss that didn't match the hologram's audio. Lyra turned, scanning the upper tiers of seats. Several other students had also noticed, their various sensory appendages twitching and rotating toward the source. Professor Quell paused his lecture. Is there a problem? Students? A single droplet of glowing, greenish liquid fell from somewhere above, landing with a soft splat near Lyra's workstation. The droplet immediately began to smoke, eating into the polished floor with alarming speed. The room went completely silent. Professor Quell's exoskeleton paled several shades. "Nobody move," he whispered, his translator barely picking up the words. "That is not part of the simulation." Panic erupted in an instant. Students of a dozen different species scrambled for the exits, some shifting into defensive forms, others releasing clouds of pheromones that stung Lyra's eyes and throat. "Emergency lockdown initiated," announced the Academy's security system. Transparent barriers slammed down, sealing all exits. Biological contaminant detected. Class 3 quarantine protocol engaged. Professor Quell raised all four of his arms, trying to restore order. "Remain calm," his amplified voice boomed. "Security drones are en route. Anyone attempting to breach quarantine will face immediate expulsion." The chaos subsided into a tense, frightened silence. Students huddled in species-specific groups, as far from the acid burn on the floor as possible. "Now then," Professor Quell's voice had acquired a dangerous edge. "Would someone care to explain how a live Venari larva found its way into my classroom?" His compound eyes swept the room, finally settling on Lyra. Perhaps our Deathworld guest might have some insight. Earth's black markets are notorious for exotic biological specimens, are they not? Lyra felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. "I had nothing to do with this," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Indeed." The professor's mandibles clicked skeptically. "A coincidence, then, that such a creature appears during our first class with a Deathworlder present, when the transport of Class 3 biological hazards requires multiple permits and specialized containment?" "With respect, Professor," Lyra stood, ignoring the flinches from nearby students. "If I wanted to smuggle a dangerous creature into this academy, it wouldn't be one I've never even heard of until today." A nervous titter ran through the classroom, quickly silenced by the professor's glare. "Nevertheless," he said, "all students will submit to an immediate scan. Security protocols dictate that any unregistered biological material must be identified and contained." A squadron of hovering security drones zipped into the classroom, their scanning beams sweeping methodically across each student. Lyra watched as Maz was scanned, the small rodent-like alien trembling visibly. Nearby, the segmented student who'd bumped into her, Zorth, was undergoing a more intensive scan, each of his body segments being analyzed separately. When the drones reached Lyra, they paused, their scanners pulsing with increased intensity. Warnings flashed across their displays. Anomalous readings. One drone announced. Unregistered biological signatures detected. Professor Quell moved closer, his tall form looming over Lyra. Open your personal storage, Earth student. Lyra reluctantly unsealed her study bag. The drone's manipulator arms carefully removed her possessions one by one. Standard issue datapad, atmospheric adaptation manual, nutrient bars formulated for human consumption. A small plant sample from the Academy's botanical garden, properly labeled and permitted. And a sealed container of water. The drone scanned each item, finding nothing unusual. Finally, it turned its attention to Lyra herself, the beam passing uncomfortably over her body from head to toe. Biological anomalies consistent with Class 5 planetary origin. The drone finally announced. No unregistered parasitic or harmful organisms detected. Professor Quell's mandibles twitched in what might have been disappointment. Continue the scans, he ordered. Every student, every corner of this room. That Venari larva didn't materialize from vacuum. As the scans continued, Lyra noticed that the bioscanners seemed to be struggling with the varied alien physiologies. Several overheated, their cooling systems whirring audibly. The containment fields around the perimeter of the room flickered occasionally, a malfunction, or perhaps interference from an unknown source. Maz sidled up to Lyra, keeping a cautious distance that was nonetheless closer than most students dared to come. "This is weird," the small alien whispered. "Venari beetles are incredibly rare. The adult specimens are kept in triple-locked stasis chambers at the Central Galactic Museum. The idea that a larva could just show up here. Could it have been dormant somewhere in the building?" Lyra asked. "The professor said they can remain inactive for centuries." Maz's whiskers twitched thoughtfully. "Maybe. This moon was terraformed only 80 years ago, but the building materials came from all over the galaxy." The small alien's eyes suddenly widened. "Oh, there's something you should see." Before Lyra could respond, a commotion broke out on the far side of the classroom. Security drones had surrounded a trembling, gelatinous student whose translucent body was pulsating with distress colors. "I swear by the 7 moons, I saw it," the student was saying, its voice translator rendering the words in a panic-stricken tone. "A giant centipede thing, scuttling into my cloak. It had mandibles and eyes, so many eyes." Professor Quell hurried over, all 4 arms gesticulating. "Trin, calm yourself. The scanners detect nothing in your biomatrix." "I know what I saw." The gelatinous student, Trin, was nearly hysterical now. "It touched me. I felt it crawling, cold and sharp." The security drones completed another scan. "No foreign organisms detected. Pulse rate elevated, but within normal parameters for species." Professor Quell's exoskeleton color shifted to a more soothing shade. "Perhaps you experienced a stress-induced hallucination. The pheromone simulators can trigger unusual responses in some species." But Lyra noticed that the professor's compound eyes were darting nervously around the room, as if searching for something he didn't want to find. The security team concluded their investigation without discovering the source of the acid droplet. Classes were suspended for the remainder of the day, while decontamination procedures were completed. Students were released in small groups, each undergoing a final scan before being permitted to leave. Lyra was the last to be cleared, a fact she found unsurprising but infuriating. Perhaps tomorrow's lesson will be less eventful, Professor Quell said, as she finally headed for the exit. "Though I should warn you, we will be discussing the apex predators of Earth. I do hope you won't find it too Personal. Lyra bit back a sharp retort and simply nodded before walking away. As she left, she could have sworn she heard another faint hiss from somewhere in the ceiling ducts, but when she looked up, there was nothing to see. That evening, Maz found Lyra in the Academy's central atrium, a vast open space where the gravity was reduced to allow flying species to move freely. Lyra sat on a bench designed for humanoid forms, watching alien students soar and drift overhead. "You okay?" Maz asked, climbing up to sit beside her. "That was a rough first day, even by GPA standards." Lyra shrugged. "I'm used to being the prime suspect. Comes with the territory when your home planet is labeled a death trap." Maz's ears twitched sympathetically. "For what it's worth, most of us don't buy into that Deathworlder nonsense. It's just, your species is so new to the galactic community. Give it a few centuries, and no one will even remember Earth was ever classified as dangerous." "A few centuries," Lyra repeated with a hollow laugh. "That's reassuring." "I meant to show you something," Maz said, changing the subject. "About the classroom. There's this weird thing with the holoscreen." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "What kind of weird thing?" "Ancient runes. Like, really ancient. Most species can't even see them. They're carved into the stone behind the holoscreen, and they only show up under certain light conditions." "And you can see them?" Maz's whiskers twitched proudly. "My species evolved in cave systems with bioluminescent fungi. Our eyes detect wavelengths most creatures can't perceive. The runes are definitely warning symbols. But I can't translate the full text." "Warning about what?" "Not sure. But there's a symbol that looks a lot like the Venari beetle, and another that translates roughly to sealed or contained." Maz hesitated. "I think there might be something behind that wall. Something that was trapped there a long time ago." Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the atrium's carefully regulated temperature. "And you think it might be awake now?" Maz nodded solemnly. "The Academy was built on the ruins of an ancient outpost. The archaeologists claimed they cleared all the hazardous artifacts. But no one looks too carefully at things they don't want to find," Lyra finished. "We should tell Professor Quell." Maz's ears flattened against their head. "You really think he'll listen to a first-year Deathworlder and an undersized Rillick? He already suspects you of smuggling the larva in." Lyra stood up, a new determination hardening her features. "Then we'll need proof. Are you up for a little after-hours investigation?" Maz's whiskers quivered with a mixture of fear and excitement. Breaking curfew and potentially facing a lethal parasite? Sounds like a typical Academy night. The small alien paused. "But maybe we should have backup." "Who did you have in mind?" Maz's eyes gleamed. "Someone who knows more about Venari beetles than they let on." Convincing Zorth to join their investigation proved surprisingly easy. The segmented alien was waiting for them outside Lyra's dormitory, all 18 segments of his body radiating agitation. "I know what you're planning," he hissed, his translator struggling to convey the complex harmonics of his native speech. "And it's stupid and dangerous, and exactly what I'd expect from a Deathworlder." Lyra crossed her arms. "Then why are you here?" Zorth's segmented body rippled in what might have been the equivalent of a frustrated sigh. "Because there were more acid burns this afternoon, on the edges of 3 desks. They appeared after the decontamination team left." "How do you know that?" Maz asked. "Because I went back to retrieve my molecular analysis kit." Zorth admitted. "I thought perhaps I could identify the specific subspecies of Venari by analyzing the acid composition." "And?" Lyra prompted. "And the burns were fresh, but by the time I set up my equipment, they had evaporated somehow. No residue, no trace elements. That's not normal, even for Venari acid." The three unlikely allies made their way through the Academy's shifting corridors, avoiding the security drones that patrolled after curfew. Maz's acute hearing gave them advance warning whenever a patrol approached, and Zorth's knowledge of the ventilation system, apparently a subject of intense interest to his species, provided alternative routes. "Why are you really helping us?" Lyra asked Zorth, as they crawled through a maintenance tunnel designed for the Academy's small repair drones. Zorth's body segments undulated in the darkness ahead of her. "My ancestor was on the original archaeological expedition that discovered this moon. His journals mentioned finding a sealed chamber with warning glyphs. The Academy administration dismissed his concerns, but certain passages were redacted from the official record." "And you think it might have contained a Venari queen?" Maz asked, bringing up the rear of their strange procession. "I think," Zorth said slowly, "that the galaxy is full of ancient horrors that sleep until disturbed. And I think that humans are not the only dangerous species worth studying." They reached a maintenance hatch that opened into the back of the xenobiology classroom. The room was dark, illuminated only by the emergency lighting that cast eerie blue shadows across the empty workstations. "The holoscreen is there," Maz whispered, pointing toward the central platform where Professor Quell had stood during the lecture. "The runes are behind it." They approached cautiously. The holoscreen was inactive, a blank vertical surface that dominated the front of the classroom. Maz produced a small device from one of the many pockets in their harness. "Spectral illuminator," the small alien explained. "It'll show us wavelengths beyond normal vision." The device emitted a soft, purple glow that transformed the seemingly blank wall behind the holoscreen. Intricate symbols appeared, carved deep into the stone, concentric circles, angular glyphs, and a central image that unmistakably depicted a segmented creature with multiple eyes and grasping mandibles. "That's definitely a Venari," Zorth confirmed, his body segments rippling with excitement or fear. Lyra couldn't tell which. "But this dialect, it's ancient, pre-galactic unification." "Can you read any of it?" Lyra asked, studying the alien script. "Parts," Zorth admitted. "This section warns of the devourer that sleeps, and this speaks of binding chains that must not break. But this symbol here," he indicated a complex glyph near the center. "This refers to a specific technological method, a stasis field, but one powered by living energy." "Living energy?" Lyra frowned. "You mean like a power source derived from biological material?" "More direct than that." Zorth's translator rendered his response in a grim tone. "It means the stasis field feeds on life force. It keeps the creature dormant by slowly consuming the energy of living beings nearby." A horrifying realization dawned on Lyra. The Academy has thousands of students, thousands of sources of living energy, which would be more than enough to maintain the stasis field, Maz squeaked, unless something disrupted it. As if in answer to the unspoken question, a faint hissing sound emanated from behind the holoscreen. All three students froze. "Please tell me that's just the ventilation system," Lyra whispered. Zorth's segments contracted in alarm. "The ventilation system doesn't make that sound." Slowly, deliberately, Lyra approached the holoscreen. She could feel a subtle vibration through the floor, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to match the hissing sound. With trembling fingers, she reached for the edge of the screen. "Lyra, don't!" Maz warned. But it was too late. Lyra peeled back the edge of the holoscreen, revealing a small section of the wall behind it. What she saw made her blood run cold. The stone was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures radiating from a central point. And within that central point was a cavity that pulsed with a sickly green light. Something moved within. Something with too many legs and too many eyes. Lyra let the holoscreen snap back into place and backed away slowly. "We need to alert security," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "There's definitely something alive in there, and I think the stasis field is failing." "No," Zorth's response was vehement. "If the administration discovers we broke curfew and invaded a secured classroom, we'll be expelled immediately. And if a Venari queen breaks loose while the academy is full of students, we'll be dead immediately," Lyra countered. "Which seems worse?" Their argument was interrupted by a loud crack from behind the holoscreen. All three students turned to see a glowing green fluid seeping from the edges of the display. "Too late for debate," Maz squeaked. "Run!" They made it halfway to the maintenance hatch before the holoscreen shattered completely. The sound of splintering technology was followed by a wet, slithering noise that raised the hair on the back of Lyra's neck. A massive form heaved itself through the broken display. In the dim emergency lighting, Lyra could make out a glistening carapace, easily 12 feet long, covered in pulsing venom sacs. Multiple compound eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence, and mandibles the size of her arm clicked together in hungry anticipation. "Queen," Zorth whispered, his translator barely functioning as his body contracted in terror. "Fully mature Venari queen." The creature raised its front segment, acidic venom dripping from specialized glands along its underside. It seemed to be surveying the room, its compound eyes taking in every detail. Then, with horrifying deliberation, it focused on the three students. "Don't move," Lyra breathed. "Some predators track by movement. Venari track by heat and chemical signatures," Zorth hissed back. "Movement won't matter." As if to prove his point, the queen surged forward with shocking speed, its segmented body flowing across the classroom floor like a nightmare given physical form. "Split up!" Lyra shouted, diving behind a workstation as acid splashed where she had been standing moments before. Maz scurried up the tiered seating, their small size allowing them to squeeze into spaces too small for the queen to follow. Zorth flattened his body, slipping beneath the lowest tier of workstations with serpentine grace. The queen paused, mandibles clicking in apparent frustration. Then it reared up, revealing a pulsing organ in its underside that Lyra hadn't noticed before. An egg sac, swollen and glistening. "It's preparing to lay," Zorth called from his hiding place. "If those eggs hatch, the entire academy becomes a feeding ground," Lyra finished grimly. "We need to contain it somehow." Contain a fully mature Venari queen? With what? Maz's voice was shrill with panic. "Those things can dissolve metal." Lyra's mind raced, recalling everything she'd learned about Earth's most dangerous predators. Every creature had weaknesses, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. What had Professor Quell said about the Venari? The venom, she realized aloud. It's both acidic and neurotoxic, which means it must be carefully balanced to maintain both properties. "So?" Zorth demanded, as the queen began methodically searching the classroom, its massive body sliding between rows of workstations. "So, if we could disrupt that balance, make the venom too acidic or too alkaline, it might neutralize both properties." Lyra explained hurriedly. "Does the lab have chemical supplies?" "Storage cabinet, north wall," Maz confirmed. "But how do we reach it with that thing between us and the supplies?" Lyra took a deep breath, drawing on years of survival training in Earth's harshest environments. "I'll distract it. You two get to the cabinet and find something basic. Sodium hydroxide, calcium carbonate, anything with a high pH." "That's suicide," Zorth protested. "Even a single drop of Venari venom can melt through bone." "I'm faster than I look," Lyra said with more confidence than she felt. Deathworlder, remember? Now go. Before they could argue further, Lyra stood up from behind her workstation and shouted, "Hey, overgrown centipede! Over here!" The Queen's reaction was immediate. It whirled with surprising agility, all its compound eyes focusing on Lyra. With a hiss that seemed to fill the entire classroom, it charged. Lyra sprinted along the curved perimeter of the room, leaping over workstations and sliding under equipment. Her earthborn muscles, evolved for a higher gravity environment, gave her an advantage in speed and strength. But the Queen was unnervingly fast. Acid splashed against the wall inches from her head as she ducked beneath a suspended aquatic environment. The liquid ate through the reinforced glass, releasing a torrent of specialized breathing fluid that spilled across the floor. The Queen slithered through the fluid without slowing, its many legs finding purchase even on the slick surface. Lyra glanced back to see Maz and Zorth reaching the supply cabinet, frantically searching through its contents. "Hurry!" she called, vaulting over a low barrier. Her foot slipped on the breathing fluid, and she went down hard, her shoulder slamming into the edge of a workstation. Pain lanced through her arm, but adrenaline pushed it aside. She rolled just as the Queen struck, its mandibles snapping shut where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier. Across the room, Maz held up a large container triumphantly. "Found it. Industrial strength base compound. Used for neutralizing acidic spills." "Bring it here!" Lyra shouted, scrambling backwards as the Queen advanced, its massive body blocking her escape routes. "We can't get past the Queen," Zorth called back. "You'll have to come to us." Lyra looked around desperately for anything she could use. Her gaze fell on her duffel bag, still sitting beside her assigned workstation, where the security drones had left it after their search. Inside was her thermal lining, designed to protect against extreme temperature variations in Earth's diverse climates. An idea formed, crazy but possible. "Throw the container," she shouted to Maz. "As hard as you can." The small alien hesitated only briefly before hurling the container with surprising strength for their size. It arced through the air, sailing over the Queen's body and landing with a clatter near Lyra's feet. The noise attracted the Queen's attention. It turned, acid dripping in anticipation of a new prey. Lyra seized the moment to lunge for her bag, yanking out the thermal lining, a thin, reflective material that could withstand temperatures from near absolute zero to volcanic heat. She grabbed the container of base compound with her other hand and backed away as the Queen advanced once more. "What's the plan?" Maz called, the small alien now perched on top of a high cabinet, safely out of the Queen's reach for the moment. "Something really stupid," Lyra admitted, continuing to back away until she felt the wall behind her. She was cornered now, with nowhere left to run. The Queen seemed to sense her vulnerability. It reared up, its front segments towering over her, mandibles spread wide to deliver a killing strike. Venom sacs along its underside pulsed, preparing to spray her with lethal acid. It was now or never. As the Queen lunged, Lyra threw the thermal lining upward like a net, simultaneously twisting the cap off the base compound. The lining enveloped the Queen's front segments just as it released a spray of venom, and Lyra emptied the entire container of alkaline solution into the makeshift sack. The reaction was immediate and violent. The Queen thrashed wildly as its venom mixed with the neutralizing agent, creating a chemical reaction that released clouds of noxious steam. The thermal lining, designed to contain extreme conditions, held the bulk of the chemicals while the Queen's own momentum drove it backward, away from Lyra. "It's working!" Zorth shouted, his body segments undulating with excitement. "The venom is being neutralized." But the Queen was far from defeated. With a strength born of desperation, it tore through the thermal lining, splattering partially neutralized venom across the classroom. Where the liquid landed, it sizzled but didn't eat through surfaces as readily as before. The Queen, however, was clearly affected. Its movements became erratic, the coordinated flow of its segments deteriorating into spasmodic thrashing. Several of its eyes had clouded over, and the venom sacs along its underside were visibly deflated. "We've wounded it," Lyra gasped, dodging a wild swing of the Queen's tail segment. "But it's still too dangerous. We need something more permanent." Maz pointed toward a supply closet on the far side of the room. "Coolant gel, for the quantum processors. It's super dense and sets like concrete when exposed to air." Lyra nodded her understanding. "Keep it distracted." As she sprinted for the supply closet, Zorth emerged from his hiding place, his segmented body flashing bright warning colors that captured the Queen's attention. The distraction worked. The creature turned away from Lyra, focusing its remaining functional eyes on this new threat. The supply closet was locked, but the Academy's security systems were designed to protect against unauthorized access, not desperate exit. Lyra smashed the internal release mechanism, and the door slid open. Inside, she found what she was looking for: massive cylinders of coolant gel used to regulate the temperature of the Academy's quantum computers. The warning label clearly stated, "Caution. Solidifies on contact with atmosphere. Use in vacuum environment only." Lyra grabbed the largest cylinder she could carry and staggered back toward the battle. The Queen had cornered Zorth against the holoscreen, its massive body preventing any escape. Maz was throwing supplies from the upper cabinets, creating distractions that bought precious seconds. "I've got it!" Lyra shouted. "Zorth, when I give the signal, drop flat." The segmented alien's translator rendered a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Lyra positioned herself behind the Queen. Cylinder ready. "Now." Zorth instantly flattened all 18 segments of his body to the floor. In the same moment, Lyra twisted the release valve on the cylinder and aimed it at the Queen's midsection. A jet of silvery liquid shot forth, enveloping the Venari's body. On contact with the air, the coolant began to solidify, forming a rapidly hardening shell around the creature's segments. The Queen thrashed wildly, trying to escape the spreading gel, but each movement only embedded it further. Within seconds, its lower body was completely encased. The hardening coolant crept upward, immobilizing segment after segment. In a last, desperate act, the Queen's egg sac pulsed violently and burst. Hundreds of tiny, wriggling larvae spilled onto the classroom floor. "The eggs!" Maz shrieked. "They're hatching!" Lyra didn't hesitate. She emptied the remaining coolant onto the writhing mass of larvae, watching with grim satisfaction as they were frozen in place, entombed in the rapidly hardening substance. The Queen gave one final, terrible hiss, and then went still, its front segments and mandibles forever frozen in a striking position. The rest of its massive body entombed in a silver-white cocoon. Silence fell over the classroom, broken only by the ragged breathing of 3 exhausted students. "We did it," Maz whispered, ears twitching in disbelief. "We actually contained a Venari Queen." Zorth's body slowly unflattened, segments rising one by one. "Temporary containment," he corrected. "The coolant will eventually break down. We need proper stasis technology." As if on cue, the classroom doors slid open, and Professor Quell burst in, followed by a squad of heavily armed security drones. The professor froze at the sight before him. 3 disheveled students standing around a massive insectoid monster encased in hardened coolant gel. "What in the name of the 7 galaxies happened here?" the professor demanded, his exoskeleton shifting through a rapid series of colors that the translator didn't attempt to interpret. Lyra stepped forward, still breathing hard from the exertion. "We found your Venari larva. Professor. Turns out it wasn't so larval after all." The aftermath was chaotic, but swift. Emergency response teams in full containment suits secured the classroom and the petrified queen. The Academy administration convened an emergency session, with Lyra, Maz, and Zorth standing before a panel of senior faculty to explain their actions. Professor Quell stood to the side, his exoskeleton a muted shade that Lyra had come to recognize as embarrassment. "Let me understand this correctly," said the Academy's chancellor. "A being composed entirely of crystalline structures that chimed melodiously when they moved. You 3 students not only discovered a fully mature Venari queen that had been sealed in the Academy walls for centuries, but you successfully neutralized and contained it without any fatalities." "Yes, Chancellor," Lyra confirmed. The ancient stasis field was failing. It had been drawing energy from the Academy's population. But something, perhaps the renovation work on the xenobiology classroom, disrupted the field enough to allow the Queen to partially awaken. "And you deduced all this through unauthorized after-hours investigation?" The Chancellor's crystals shifted in what might have been amusement. "We tried to follow proper channels," Maz piped up, whiskers twitching nervously. "But our concerns weren't taken seriously." All eyes turned to Professor Quell, who clicked his mandibles defensively. "How was I to know?" the professor protested. "The possibility of a live Venari specimen on Omeira is statistically negligible. The archaeological surveys conducted before the Academy's construction were thorough." "Clearly not thorough enough," Zorth interjected, his segmented body rippling with indignation. "My ancestors' warnings were ignored. The glyphs clearly indicated a sealed predator." The Chancellor raised an appendage for silence. "What's done is done. The question now is how to proceed." The crystalline being turned toward Lyra. "Miss Santos, your actions were either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Perhaps both. But they were undeniably effective." Lyra stood a little straighter. "Thank you, Chancellor. But I couldn't have done it without Maz and Zorth. We each contributed essential knowledge and abilities." "Indeed." The Chancellor's crystals chimed thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is a lesson here that extends beyond xenobiology. The combined strengths of different species, working in cooperation rather than isolation." Professor Quell stepped forward, his exoskeleton now shifting to a more confident hue. "Chancellor, if I may, I believe this incident highlights the need for a significant revision to our curriculum. The theoretical study of dangerous organisms is clearly insufficient." "What do you propose, Professor?" "A practical component, supervised, of course, and with appropriate safety measures. But these students have demonstrated that real-world experience, combined with diverse perspectives, can achieve what theory alone cannot." The Chancellor considered this for a long moment, crystals chiming softly. An interesting proposal, and who would instruct this practical component? Professor Quell's compound eyes swiveled toward Lyra. "I believe our Earth student has already proven herself quite capable in this regard. Perhaps a co-instructorship could be arranged." Lyra couldn't hide her surprise. "Me? But I'm only a first-year student." "A first-year student who successfully contained a Venari queen," the professor pointed out. "Something that even seasoned xenobiologists have rarely accomplished." The Chancellor's crystals shifted to a brilliant blue. "Very well. Miss Santos will serve as co-instructor for a new practical module on dangerous organism containment. Full academic honors will be awarded to all 3 students involved in tonight's incident." As the meeting concluded and the students were dismissed, Professor Quell approached Lyra in the corridor outside. "I owe you an apology, Miss Santos," he said, mandibles clicking softly. I allowed preconceptions about your species to cloud my judgment. It seems that being from a Deathworld has its advantages." Lyra smiled. "I prefer to think of it as being from an adaptability-focused environment. Professor." "Yes, indeed." The professor's exoskeleton shifted to a thoughtful shade. "Perhaps it's time we revised our classification system as well. Deathworld does carry certain unfortunate connotations." "I'd like that," Lyra said sincerely. "Earth has its dangers, but so does every world in its own way. What matters is how we adapt and work together." Professor Quell extended one of his forearms in a formal gesture of respect. "Wisdom beyond your years. Miss Santos, I look forward to our collaboration." 3 months later, Lyra stood at the front of the newly renovated xenobiology laboratory. The room had been completely redesigned, with reinforced containment fields and emergency response systems integrated into every workstation. The ancient wall with its warning glyphs had been preserved behind transparent aluminum, a reminder of the history that had nearly repeated itself. Before her stood a class of mixed species, including several who had been present during the original incident. Maz sat in the front row, whiskers twitching with excitement. Zorth had taken a position near the back, his segmented body displaying colors of attentive interest. "Welcome to Advanced Practical Xenobiology," Lyra began, her confidence having grown considerably since her first day at the academy. "Today, we'll be conducting a controlled observation of a dormant Venari drone, safely contained. I promise." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the classroom. Professor Quell activated the central display, which revealed a small, stasis-sealed container. Inside, a juvenile Venari drone, barely 2 feet long, rested in suspended animation. The specimen before you is 1/10 the size of a mature queen. The professor explained. "Its venom sacs are undeveloped, and it has been chemically sedated for additional safety. Nevertheless, we will observe strict containment protocols." Lyra moved to stand beside the container. "The first rule of dealing with dangerous organisms is respect, not fear. Respect. Understanding the difference can save your life." She caught Zorth's gaze, and the segmented alien's body rippled in what she now recognized as approval. "The second rule," Lyra continued, "is to never assume you know everything about a species. Even the most comprehensive database can miss crucial details that only direct observation will reveal." Maz nodded enthusiastically, ears perked forward. "And the third rule," Lyra said, placing her hand on the container, "is that cooperation across species lines is our greatest advantage. The Venari Queen was defeated not by a single approach, but by combining different perspectives and abilities." Professor Quell's exoskeleton shifted to a proud shade as he addressed the class. "Students, you have the unique opportunity to learn from someone who has faced one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators and lived to tell the tale. I suggest you pay close attention." As the lecture continued, Lyra caught sight of her reflection in the polished surface of a workstation. The scared, uncertain Earth student who had arrived at GPA 6 months ago was gone. In her place stood a confident xenobiologist who had found her place among the stars, not despite being from Earth, but because of it. Outside the classroom windows, the 3 moons of Amira shone brightly, illuminating a campus where a human could walk the halls without whispers following in her wake. Where Deathworlder was beginning to be replaced with adaptation specialist in official documentation. Where the strengths of different species were celebrated rather than feared. Lyra smiled and turned back to her students. "Now then, who can tell me the distinguishing features of a Venari drone versus a worker, And more importantly, how would you approach containing each? Hands, tentacles, and various appendages rose eagerly across the classroom. As Lyra called on the first student, she felt a sense of belonging that transcended planetary origins. Here, teaching others about the creatures that had once been used to define her as dangerous. She had found her purpose. The lesson continued in the bright light of day. No monsters hiding in the shadows, only knowledge waiting to be discovered, and prejudices waiting to be overcome.